Hi, I'm Scout Wonder. Let's go down to the river and I'll show you how I made this mantle.
I started by going down to the river in St. Charles, where it's a common stomping ground for me. I can usually find logs, and you can see there were quite a few laying out there. I came across these, well, it's a small pile of logs actually. There's usually a ton more there. But there's a little batch here that's pretty close to the parking lot. And I found a nice little section right here at the top of this log. I thought it was an elm log. It turns out to be a hackberry, but you can see it's a pretty cool section. It's not too rotten, has some cool texture, some cool figure to it. So I decided to make a mantle out of that area right there. I started by measuring the length, and I'm going to cut about 6 feet because it's a standard mantle length. Sometimes we do custom ones, obviously they're bigger, but a normal fireplace is about 6 feet long. While I was cutting the ends off here, I was being pretty careful because there's rocks underneath there. The whole thing that I'm on is kind of like a rock dike levee, and you gotta be careful not to hit your chainsaw because it'll dull it right away. After I cut the log to length, I cut a couple wood chunks and put them under the ends of the logs to keep the log up and keep away from those pesky rocks. To get started actually making the mantle, I'm marking it out. I'm cutting about 8 inches wide, 7 to 8. If I got to pick how wide I'd make a mantle, I'd have the finished one probably end up about 6 to 7 inches high, basically, and then 9 to 10 inches deep. So I marked this at about 8 inches wide, mostly due to the fact that the log wasn't that big. So I mark each end at 8 inches, give it a little chainsaw cut on there so I can see each end, and then I just use the bar. I just sight up just sight down the log and just aim the chainsaw from one mark to the other, and then just kind of connect the dots. I've thought about, and people ask me about, why don't I use something that kind of shoot a straight line on there, to use like a chalk line or something like that. But I'll tell you that on logs, it's hard to run a chalk line on there because there's nothing flat and straight. And my chainsaw, eyeing it up like that, actually makes a pretty good straight cut. I have a 30-inch bar on there, so I'm only cutting 6 feet of log. It's not leaving too much in the middle that, I need to connect the dots on. So the chainsaw does a pretty good job of making a pretty straight cut. Now right there, cut too far through. I normally wouldn't cut all the way through on the end because when you do, things rock, and whatever you use to level it out changes. So I cut a little too far on that one end, straightened it back up, and then got going again. You can see while I'm cutting that the chainsaw, when you're ripping like that, makes a ton of dust really fast. They're long shavings, which are pretty cool because you feel like you're cutting really fast, but they'll tend to clog the chainsaw up, so I got to stop pretty often, kind of clean that out and get those shavings out of the way. So I'm here in St. Charles. This is where I'm cutting at. I live in St. Charles. Our shop is in O'Fallon, but both of those spots are right in between two major rivers. I'm on the Missouri right here, but right to the north of us is the Mississippi. So it is very common for us to interact with the rivers on a regular basis. You can't really go anywhere without meeting a river where we're at. and at the same time find a bunch of logs. Now, this spot where I'm working at is commonly underwater. I'm basically in the river. It's not in the river now, it's on the bank, but this is usually underwater. Here's the graph that I look at when I'm trying to decide what I'm going to do, if I'm going down the river or not. The river's currently at 9 feet, and that's the reason I went down there, because it's been super dry for about a month and the river's very, very low. This area that I'm at, I know will be underwater and collecting logs at about 17 feet. So this is, 8 feet below what I'd call kind of normal. And then it doesn't even start to flood until, what that graph show, 23 feet, I think, like that, 25 feet. So the river's super low right now. Anyways, this other graph, I just wanted to show you what might happen if you're not watching carefully. If you came down here to work, got going on cutting some logs, and weren't paying attention to the river levels, something like this might happen. This is a graph from earlier this year after some rain, pretty substantial rain, and you can see how fast the river would rise on that graph. So you'll want to be on the downside of that so that any work you did doesn't get washed away. Now that I've got two sides cut, which are basically the top and the bottom of the mantle, I flipped the mantle over and set it up for the last cut. I'm doing the same thing on this side. I marked one end, mark the other end, and then kind of eye them up and then connect the dots. This is the one place where you could use a chalk line, of course, if you were worried about it, but it's one less thing for me to carry, one less thing for me to forget and leave outside. And I know that this mantle, when it dries, is going to probably not be totally straight anyway, so I'm going to have to straighten all this up in the shop when it's dry and officially done. But you can tell the cut's pretty straight, so I'd recommend just doing it with a chainsaw and getting it close.
I got the mantle back to the shop. It's basically done, except for there's a couple little nubs in here that I just want to hit with a hand planer so they look a little better. My final version of a roughed out driftwood mantle. I'm not going to do anything else to it right now because, one, we don't have a customer for this yet, so I don't have a final size, and two, it's not dry. It looks dry on the outside, looks really dry on the outside, but it's very, very wet on the inside. So until I have a customer that tells us what size they would like and this is dry, I really can't do anything with it. So I think we're done for now. I'm Scott Wonder. Thanks for coming on this little adventure with me. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.